me tell you a story. It's part of the Z Carolina Storyteller. Written by me, produced by me, edited by me, starring me, horribly marketed by me. I'm 2 years in and I don't have a team. If you want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/Carolina Storyteller and subscribe. We've got 3 tiers, and from those 3 tiers, you can get early episodes, exclusive content, and if you go for the big bucks, we'll even let you be part of the live audience. Stay spooky, my friends.
The Carolina Storyteller. Today it's another solo episode, just me. And today I don't have a story for you. I have more of an informational session for you. I'm going to call this the Paranormal 101. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explain some things that I've gotten questions about with some of the stories that I'm telling. So, as a storyteller, sometimes I take stories from all over and I spread them to people. And people go, oh, I've heard that one, but it was over here. I've heard that one and it was over there. And a lot of times that's the case. This is where urban legends come from. Somebody hears a story, or there is a true story or fact that happens, and then that story is changed and adapted for the place where somebody lives. A good example of this is the Hook Man. There was actually a hook killer at some point in time, but it was definitely not in your backyard. If it was, you'd know the specific name of the killer and everybody would talk about it. And granted, he only got like 4 or 5 kills and was a serial killer, and it was in the 1930s. He's not coming back. But the urban legend is great. So when you're sitting around the fireside and you're telling the story of the young couple that goes out to the Lover's Lane Park and parks their car underneath a tree, and they're making out, and suddenly they hear a noise. And so the boyfriend gets out, and then the girlfriend hears a yell and doesn't hear anything, but hears something banging on the roof of the car constantly, like this tat-a-tap, tat-a-tap, tat-a-tap. And so in some versions of the story, she drives off, and as she drives off, she looks back, and she sees her boyfriend hanging there, and it was his feet trying to keep him up. And as she drove off, she literally killed him because he had nothing to balance on. And others, she gets out, runs, and sees her boyfriend dying on top of the car, and only to see the Hook Man, and then gets back in and drives off. And the Hook Man scratches at the car, and when she gets out, she finds the man's hook hung on the car. Sometimes she's just dead. It's an urban legend. It changes based on who's telling the story and how freaked out they want to make you. Then you have stories that are more like, well, they're like a phenomenon. Now, this is like the woman in white story that I told. I told the story of the woman in white, and I was talking about the phenomenon, not a specific story, because the woman in white isn't a specific story. It's a group of stories. But the thing is that they're not necessarily all the same story. In fact, some of them are very vengeful spirits, and some of them are just forlorn and sad. Some of them get in the car with you. Some of them disappear before you ever have a chance to look back at them. You just see them for a moment, and you wonder if you're crazy. The woman in white is not a specific ghost story, as I was sharing it, but more of a ghost phenomenon. So what is a phenomenon? A phenomenon is an event that occurs repeatedly in different areas under similar circumstances. Okay? A good example of this is ghost lights or demonic phenomenon. These are phenomenon that we use to rate what they call demonic possession. If these things happen in all of these ways and all this phenomenon is present, then we know that's probably something demonic. If none of this happens, well, then we know it's not demonic. Their phenomenon are just a type. They're not necessarily the whole story. And I think it's important to point that out. That, when I'm telling these stories and I start talking about phenomenon versus specific stories, you might find that there are aesthetics to the story that are similar to other stories because they are similar phenomenon. If you look at the Roland Doe case and then other cases of documented demonic possession, there are a lot of phenomena that are really similar in between them. The aversion to holy objects, the feeling of terror, the temperature changes, the arching of the back, the knowing things that nobody should know, the vomiting ungodly amounts of stuff even though they haven't eaten anything and should have nothing in their stomach. These type of things, they don't come by themselves. They come in a series, and then based off of the phenomenon and based off of what it is, we can classify it in a thing. And so a woman in white is a type of phenomenon. So when I'm telling stories about a phenomenon, I could still go back and say, well, let me tell you the story about a woman in white from this place in South Carolina, or this place in Texas, or this place in Connecticut, because a specific story is always going to be different. The phenomenon, on the other hand, is something that has been seen wide. So while the phenomenon may be the same from story to story to story, the actual stories in place are going to be different. And that is a difference between a phenomenon and an urban legend. The only thing that changes in an urban legend is the place. Okay? The only thing that changes when you say Candyman into the mirror is the fact that you say it in your mirror. Candyman still happened where Candyman happened. And I'm not saying his name another time because I'm not going to push my luck with that. Now, we've talked about two different types. So now we need to get into classifications of other things. Like, let's talk about ghosts and hauntings. Okay? Not all hauntings are the same. Sometimes you have what's called a residual haunting. And this is where, for whatever reason, there's just kind of like a memory on the place that replays. And that occasionally you see something. This is something similar to what they say happens with Theodosia Burr's ghost. Okay? She never interacts with anybody. She's just seen. She doesn't communicate. She doesn't do anything. She just kind of walks around. Okay? Then you have a more interactive haunting. Now, this is the case with a lot of more of the spooky stories that you hear. One that I've told would be the spirit on the stairs who catches people when they trip. This spirit interacts with the living in some way. He doesn't do much, but he's just there to do something. Now, there are others that do similar things, and some that aren't as benevolent and may even be more malevolent in the case studies. And understand that when I say these things, I'm not 100% saying that these things have happened. Now, I do know for a fact I have been caught on that stairwell. And I do know for a fact that I have heard Theodosia Burr's dogs. But I cannot confirm that I've ever seen her ghost. And, I can't tell you what caught me on the stairwell, just that I did trip once and felt myself like I had been caught by something. Maybe it's some kind of gravitational spike. Maybe there's some kind of quantum physics thing going on there. Maybe it has absolutely nothing to do with the paranormal. What I can tell you is that it happened, that it is unexplained, and that the story behind it ties it to a spirit that has left this world. Well, what about spirits that didn't come from this world? Your cryptids. These are creatures that may be of this world or may not be of this world, but have a supernatural nature. Okay? Your cryptids they're basically creatures that we can't explain. Now, these could be very real creatures that we just haven't discovered yet. Understand, we've only covered a small portion of this planet. Most of this planet is covered in water, and we can't even explore the deepest parts. We have a legendary city of Atlantis, and we can't figure out where the hell that is. And we have satellites in space with big cameras looking down, and we can't figure out where that thing could have been. Okay? There's documentation that the city existed. Plenty of writers wrote about it before it vanished, and there's no telling why it vanished. Volcano, hurricane, earthquake, any number of things. A massive tidal wave could have wiped that thing out. We don't know. But we know that it was talked about. Plenty of people talked about it. And then poof, gone with the wind. And we can't find hide nor hair of it. And every day as we dig into the ground, we find evidence of things that we didn't know were ever here. So when we talk about cryptids, we're talking about things that have been described by people that can't be explained and have not been documented. Could these things be real? Absolutely. Could these things be a whole bunch of baloney? Absolutely. Is there evidence to back them up? Sometimes. There is evidence of Bigfoot. There's even video of Bigfoot if you believe it. But no one's captured one. There's not a lot of evidence. The evidence is blurry. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Look at the chupacabra. People have found what they believe to be a chupacabra only to further study it and realize this is just a really sick coyote, or this is just this, or this is just that. And so, sorry folks, technical difficulty there. It happens. I'm sorry. But as I was saying, with cryptids, these are possible. They are very likely. And some, they're very unlikely. They are still creatures, though, and that means that they are bound by the same physical laws you and I are. Gravity, have to breathe air, have to eat food, have to poop, have to sleep, have to die. They are creatures. They're maybe strong, maybe dangerous, maybe deadly, maybe poisonous, but they're not necessarily spooky supernatural. They can't control your mind or do crazy things. They're cryptids. Okay, they're creatures. Next, you have more of the. These are where we get into kind of the supernatural beings. Okay, now, these are beings that aren't necessarily cryptids. They're not of this world, but they're around this world. Your jinns, your divics, your fae. People have said they've seen fairies, they've seen leprechauns. You know, whatever you want to throw out there. These creatures are not of this world. And they might not necessarily respond to the same typical rules that we respond to. Now, they're sometimes referred to cryptids, sometimes not. The Jersey Devil and the Mothman are good examples of these, as well as the Plaid-Eye. They don't necessarily suffer the same rules that we suffer. They're not bound by the same laws of nature that we are. They don't have to deal with everything that we have to deal with. They're a little wonky on how the rules work. With these creatures, should they exist, we have to kind of take a step back and reconsider how we approach and view these creatures and approach and view their stories. And remember, big part of storytelling is sharing knowledge. And sometimes it's entertainment. And as I said on an interview just the other day with Scott from Your Comedy Minute, sometimes you can't let the truth get away of a good story. And while, yes, a good story is great, the truth is also important too. And so you kind of got to sometimes remove fact from fiction without believing that it's all fiction. Like, let's take an example, the shootout in Kentucky that happened back in the 50s, where an entire family spent 6 hours in a gun battle with some unknown creature, and there was a light, and there was mysterious goo, and people are like, oh, well, it was just barn owls. And I'm like, barn owls? Really? Barn owls aren't going to come around a freaking gunshot. They're going to fly off. These creatures continued to think. Now, something happened to that family. 11 people experienced something that night. And you can find out the entire story by going to Founding Lore Fathers and listening to the episode I did with them about the Hopkinsville shootout and about the events that happened that night for this family who were plagued by what they account to being aliens. It was something. Something definitely happened. They had an experience. Can I say that experience was extraterrestrial? Can I say that experience was a cryptid? Can I say that experience was a supernatural being? No, I can't give that information because I don't have evidence and there wasn't enough evidence collected. What I can say is that 11 people experienced something. And a lot of times when we're dealing with the paranormal, we don't get that. We don't get that people have experienced something. We pass the stories off as if they're hoo-ha. And we come too far in science to believe in that kind of mythological, spooky creations. Oh, it's magic. It doesn't exist anymore. We have science. Dude, science is magic. Okay? It literally is. The people that were doing magic before, They were just doing science. They figured out a way to make things happen. They learned the laws, and they were able to do things that nobody else was able to do. They were even able to pass off their knowledge to those who could comprehend and understand it. And it is how magicians, how these sages and magicians and healing people were able to share this knowledge and pass it on down through the generations and advance it. Okay? These soothsayers, these sages of the past that people think were hoo-ha, they were magicians. They were practicing magic. Medicine was considered black magic. Fire was once considered magic. Okay? So, if there's something that we didn't understand then that we now understand now through science, it is 100% possible that there's still something we don't understand now that we may understand in the future through science. So we have to accept that possibility. And then if we accept that possibility, we can't discern someone's report simply based off of, well, I've never seen it and there's no evidence of it, because they've clearly experienced something. There was evidence that something happened. It might not be aliens, but we do have to say that something happened. We can't discredit them based on the word aliens or paranormal or supernatural. Another instance that I like to think about is the Amityville horror incidents. What happened to the Lutzes? Nothing has happened in that house ever since. But I had family that lived there at the time. And they have told me that the Lutzes story is very true. They knew the Lutzes. They knew what happened, and they knew that they left. They saw the house. The door was blown out. Crazy shit happened at that place. It was weird. It happened, and then, just like that, it was gone. Now, could that be something residual? Could it be something else? I don't know. I'm getting off track here. So let me get back to what I wanted to go through, because I've still got a couple other things I want to talk about. Next up on my list is poltergeists. Now, poltergeists are a type of phenomenon that is considered very violent and usually malicious. And these are the ones that open and slam doors, throw things, can leave scratches, but they're not demonic. There are lots of theories on what poltergeists actually are. Some think they're spirits. Some think they're actually tied to the emotions and the events that are happening in the house or that have happened previously is negative energy that has built up and kind of created this consciousness. It's not able to communicate, but it is able to do things and to lash out. It is almost a reptilian brain supernatural entity that all it's able to do is to do harm. These things are extremely dangerous and extremely hard to deal with. And what's strange is that they may infest a house one minute and not be there the next. This very well could have been what happened to the Lutz family. George Lutz got really lucky when he found a house that was dirt cheap. I mean, literally dirt cheap. It was out of steel. But it was outside of his price range. But still, he found this miracle house on the cheap, and he was putting himself in financial burden. He was putting burden on himself, burden on his family. He had a new mixed family. There were a whole lot of emotions. These kids are stepkids. If you've ever been a stepchild, they're right at the beginning. There's that animosity because this isn't your real father. This is just some guy that's shacking up with mom. And stepkids all start like that. We all have to get over that part. When our parents get divorced, it's something we all have to deal with. Foster kids are even worse because we're having to deal with people who aren't even close to our parents trying to be our parents. The only way you get around that is if you're adopted as a child, and then it hits you when you find out when you're 18, 19, or 20. Kids can have very strong emotions and not communicate them well because they don't have the words yet. They don't have the ability. So this is very possible what happened to the Lutzes at Amityville. This is very possible that some kind of poltergeist developed because of all of the emotions and all of the stress and all of the pressure that was going on in that house at that time. And it could be why it never showed its face again. These can have residual appearances, like, the ghost boy that the Warrens had the picture of and things like that. But generally, once the emotion is taken care of, they fade away. Then you have your really dangerous ones, your Diviks, your Jinns, and your demons. Okay, now demons, for the most part, are kind of tied to Christianity. Primarily, they're bound by rules, and they're definitely not from this world. And usually, the only way they get in is through some kind of possession. And there is classifications on them. There are specialists that work on them. You know, not everything is a demon, and it's something that you see a lot in modern paranormal shows. Is, oh, this must be a demon. Not really, dude. Sorry to say, it's probably not a demon. It's probably something else. Now, this is just a quick rundown. It's Paranormal 101. You know, it's giving you some terms, it's giving you some ideas, and it's giving you something to think about. In the future, with my stories, I'm going to try and be more specific when I'm talking about a phenomenon versus when I'm talking about a specific ghost, to make sure that you understand that. But, you know, sometimes if you hear a story and it's similar to another story, it's not that it's the same story, just changed. It's that it's the same situation at a different place. Anyway, that's today's episode. I'm sorry about the technical difficulty. Sorry if it feels a little rushed. There's a lot to go through and I wanted to get it out to you. Anyway, we'll see you next week with a special guest. Stay spooky, my friends.